All right, so I think we're going to go ahead and get started. As you enter, please continue to share where you're joining us from in the chat. This is super exciting. So welcome once again to Office Hours, and this is hosted in conjunction with MoMA's free online courses for K through 12 teachers. If you're not already enrolled in one of MoMA's online courses yet, we'll hope you'll join us after this session. My colleague is pasting a link to the courses in the chat, so you'll see that. I am joined by my colleagues Larissa Raphael and my colleague Francis Estrada. And we're also welcomed by our guest, Lisa Montalbano, who is a high school teacher at New World High School, which is one of our partner schools. You're going to hear from her in just a moment, but some of you might remember Lisa if you were to previous office hours that we focused or hosted on social emotional learning and remote teaching. So we're really excited that Lisa's here. For those of you that are new, office hours is meant to be an informal hour-long conversation to extend the conversations that you all are having in the course. Today, we're going to focus on remote teaching, and we're all going to offer tips for you for remote teaching and also how you can incorporate the arts into your classroom. So thanks to all of you who've already started the conversation in the discussion forums. We're looking forward to answering the questions live today and sharing some strategies that we have. We'll be starting today with a presentation that Lisa Montalbano is going to give about strategies that she's using in her classroom. We'll also think a little bit about remote teaching. We'll also talk a little bit about what we've been doing here at MoMA, and then we will field questions about remote learning from all of you. So we'd like to stay focused on that topic, but please feel free to add any other questions about museum-based teaching or other things that are on your mind, and we'll do our best to answer those other questions if we have time. Throughout the session, please post your questions for us in the Q&A. You can access the captions by navigating the bottom right of the Zoom window on your desktop. You can either click on closed caption or and then view subtitles, or you can click on the three dots that you'll see where it says for more and then view subtitles. So we're using the caption service Rev, just so you know. Several of our MoMA colleagues are present and they're behind the scenes, and they're also going to be responding to you in the chat. Once again, just make sure that you click on all panelists and all attendees so that everyone can see your comments. We are recording the session and we are going to post the link in the coming days, so look out for that. Before we actually dive into our program, we just want to take a moment to acknowledge that the Museum of Modern Art was built on the land of the Lenape peoples. I would like to just ask you all to join us in acknowledging the Lenape community, acknowledging their elders, both past and present, and also acknowledging future generations. Here at MoMA, we would also like to acknowledge that MoMA was founded upon exclusions and erasures of many Indigenous peoples, including those on whose lands this institution is located. We want to also take a moment to acknowledge the Black Lives Matter movement and the uprising against police brutality going on around us in the United States. As educators, we believe that we all endeavor to present our students and various perspectives beyond their immediate communities to build empathy and to build understanding. This is something that's very important, especially today. So thank you so much for joining us. And with that, I'm really excited to turn things over to our colleague, Lisa.
Hi, everybody. How's everybody today from across the world? I'm Lisa Montalbano, and I am a teacher at New World High School. I teach English as a new language. Our population is unique in that our entire school, or 90% of our school population, are English language learners as a second or third or even fourth language. We have students who speak Arabic, Spanish, French, Albanian, and we have students from West Africa, from Senegal, from Guinea, Ghana, from Ecuador, Albania, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, Egypt, Yemen. So we basically have a very wide array of students. Our goal for our students is college, for all of them. So we push very hard to make sure that they are on that track. I do not see the presentation. Is the presentation being shown? Thank you. Okay, so new world. What's the new world of remote learning in 2020? So how do we incorporate art? How do we leverage art and create more dialogue and more interest with students? So I'm not sure what platform you're using. We use Google Classroom. And in this scenario, one of the first things I did was, because my students are not here with me, I asked them to create images of themselves by using a Bitmoji. So every morning when they go into Google Classroom, they see an image of themselves. Next slide. One of the things that happened over the summer was I spent a lot of time doing webinars. There's an organization called Simple K-12 that had a lot of remote learning seminars. So I participated in many of them. And one of the rages this summer was this virtual classroom. How do we create a virtual classroom? How do we bring students in and make them feel comfortable when they're not in the classroom? So I created this, and it represents the various things that we'll focus on over the course of the first half of the year and the entire year. So positivity, English, of course. The book that we're reading is Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds, which deals with some of these issues of racial tension, gun violence, police brutality. I also always use the MoMA as part of my curriculum. So there's the image of The Policeman by Kerry James Marshall. And then something about myself. I love flowers, I love my students, and I don't really love masks, but we need to wear them. So this is where we are. This is where we are in our environment. So I welcome the students with this virtual class. And then, next slide, please. I asked them to create their own. And this is one of the first things that we did. And it gave me an opportunity to see what students were interested in, what they wanted in their classroom. And this particular student, I thought was very fascinating, because this heart, she used my links to hearts. This heart actually links to a video on sloths, which I had no idea that she was a sloth fan. So it was very interesting to have her do that. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do we engage our students? How do we structure assignments so that students can fulfill that assignment and complete it? Part of the problem in the remote environment is that students do not complete their assignments because they don't really know how. And what resources can you use to make it more engaging? So this year I revamped, and I think most teachers are revamping their lessons completely, from a typical handout or a document where you fill in answers and you talk and you discuss and then you hand it in, to something that's a little bit more engaging. So I use Google Forms a lot. I use short responses, especially with art analysis, a lot. And for my projects, I use Google Slides. I don't use Google Docs. I find that they're just boring. They don't have any type of engagement. And they're also difficult to grade. So when I look at all these things, I try to find ways to pump out more assignments that are manageable, and also be able to give responses and feedback to students, which is difficult in this environment as well. So what are some of the resources that you can use? My feeling is, how do you make it fun? But you have to be consistent, because if you're not consistent, then students don't know what to do when you waste time. So you have to be consistent with your choice of technology. And it also has to be something that is engaging and fun. So for some of the younger grades and the math teachers, I'm noticing that they're using Pear Deck. Pear Deck is a platform that allows you to draw, that allows you to solve math problems. Class Dojo is a behavior modification program. And then I use Quizlet all the time for vocabulary. It allows for images, it allows for competition. And I also use Kahoot for challenges, for reading comprehension challenges. But you have to decide for yourself, what are those resources that you're comfortable with using and that meet your needs. Next. Okay, so socio-emotional learning. We all know that in this environment, everybody on some level is anxious or concerned or just not right. So what I would like to do every morning that I meet with my students, and we're in a blended model, so we only meet 2 to 3 times a week, I touch base with them through this mood meter. And this is something that I learned through my workshops with MoMA. Students have to select a color, they have to select a word. There are a lot of words here, and that was intentional because I want my students to take in language as much as they can. So, and synonyms. So this is something that we use on a daily basis, and that allows me to touch base with the students. At first, it took maybe 5 to 10 minutes for them to complete. Now it takes maybe 2 to 4 because they're used to the structure and the consistency. The next slide, please. It's important with anything that you choose that you know how to use it well, that it works for you and it works for the students. So make sure they put their name on everything and use this as a grammar lesson. Make sure they capitalize their name because for some reason students still don't capitalize their first and last names. So you can use this, and there are various ways to check their responses. So make sure you're comfortable with it, and so are they. Next slide, please. What I've added to this mood meter are questions. So this last week, so these are typical questions. What's your happiness level? What's your anxiety level? And then I want feedback. Does it help you understand your feelings? Do you like doing the mood meter? Does it help you? This last week, I added additional questions related to the presidential election. What did you learn about the candidates? And it's just a quick way of touching base and seeing where students are on various topics. And I often use it to take myself back to whatever it is we're learning, whatever it is we're focusing on, to kind of circle back with the students on the topic. Next slide, please. Again, the mood meter can be modified for any and all age levels. It can be modified for adults, it can be modified for little ones. And in this particular example, you can talk about shapes and go over shapes with little ones using this mood meter.
Mm-hmm. Lisa, can you share with everyone what you mentioned to me when we were having a conversation about artworks in the mood meter?
Yes, so when we did our workshop together with our art teachers and myself, one of the teachers put together various art pieces. One was, I don't remember the exact works. One was, green, one was yellow, one was red, and one was blue, obviously, but it was a piece of art. And so they used that to touch base with the students.
That's great.
Yeah, it was great. Next slide, please. Okay, Jason Reynolds. If you do not know Jason Reynolds, you need to know Jason Reynolds. He is changing the world of young adult literature. We are doing this book with my sophomores and my juniors, and it's covering a lot of the themes that are current in the United States. Most importantly, he strives to have a more empathetic society. It touches on Black Lives Matter, on gang violence, on breaking the rules, on breaking the cycle where we believe we need to follow rules, and it touches on racism. Next, please. Okay, so how do I incorporate art? I do it all the time, and it's becoming more and more natural. This Kerry James Marshall piece is just something that is so compelling that you really can use it for various portions of your curriculum. I'm using this in conjunction with the book Long Way Down. And I also use the video that Francis put together about the artist process for two different assignments with both my sophomores, my juniors, and my seniors. Next slide, please. So here, this is a lot of language. And the reason why I put it there is because you have to be very explicit in your instructions for all of your assignments, because many of the students may not be on your synchronous call for one reason or another. And they need to be able to go back and do the assignment asynchronously. So although it seems like a lot of language, and it is, you have to be really clear about what things you want students to do. Now, you need to keep these things consistent, again, so that the next time they see that short response, they're not trying to figure out what to do. They know they're going to first start by looking closely. They're going to indicate 5 things that they notice. They're going to do a posture. They're going to do something kinesthetic so they can feel the characters. And then tie it back to whatever you're doing. What are they looking at? How does it tie to a book? How do you think this policeman would react if he were placed in our novel? So that's one way that I use the Kerry James Marshall piece. Next piece. The next way I used it was I asked the students to watch Francis's video and do exactly what he said. If you notice, the words are word for word what he said in the video. Think of someone you see around your neighborhood. What do they look like? His exact words. So this is reinforcing language. And then ask them to make a sketch. And as you can see, this is the sketch of one of my students. We titled it together, The Mechanic. This is someone that he sees on the street every day. And it's funny, today I showed it to another student. He said, oh, yeah, I know that guy. I don't know.
That's amazing.
It is amazing. I know that guy. I know that mechanic. He's down the block. Next slide, please. So how do I take it to a different level? How do I use different forms of the art that's displayed in the MoMA? And for my seniors, they're in the process of applying to college, and they need to write personal statements. And my feeling is that when a college admissions officers read their statement, they should walk away knowing one important thing about that student. There should be a word that sticks in their mind that should say, yes, I want that student in my college because he's dedicated, he persevered, he overcomes obstacles, whatever it is. So I used Rouchet. Next slide, please. Am I pronouncing his name right? Is it Rouchet?
Yep.
That's right.
Okay, I'm using Rouchet to show the power of a single word. So I showed this as an example, and we talked about oof, which, oof, who knows? And then we talked about very, and how one word can be very powerful, and how the choice of black and white makes it even more powerful. It's very what? Are you very X? And then I asked the students to create their own work. But first, another thing that's really important in the remote learning world is to model. Model whatever it is you want, because you don't always have time to explain. Next slide, please. So if anything I want you to walk away from in this webinar is that I do not like the blended model. The blended model does not work for me. I think that students should be seen every day. I think there should be some type of consistency. And so I do not like the model, but this particular artwork doesn't display that. This is like, maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. Let's go to the next slide. I don't. This is how I feel. It's dark, it's dirty, it's messy, okay? It doesn't solve the problems. It's not giving us the environment to teach, in my opinion. Next slide, please. Another thing that's important to do in everything that you do is think about how can you teach the students to use the technology better? How can you teach them to enhance it? So this was very specific. First, we talked about, okay, how do you put in a background? Some of them don't know how to do that in Google Slides. How do you select a different font? What are the names of the fonts? What sizes do you use? Why do you use that size? And then pick a slide and tell me which one you prefer. And so in my example, I prefer the second slide because it is dark and angry. I am angry in the blended model because I only see my students 2 or 3 times a week, and I want to see them every day. So that was my modeling for the students. Now, I gave them sentence starters. I gave them the structure. I'm not asking them to create their own sentences. I want exactly this. Because again, I'm embedding grammar, capitalization, periods, sentence structure, all of that. Next slide, please. How am I doing on time, Lisa? Am I okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So this is an example of one of my students' work. And I think this was absolutely fabulous because it is exactly who he is. He's an extremely hard worker. And he sees that light. He sees that light in the darkness because he knows he works in his room at home. He comes to school. He's one of the few students who comes to school. We only have about 10% of our entire population coming to the school, but he comes because he truly cannot work at home. There were too many distractions. So this was one that he did. And now the next slide. And this was the other. And then we talked about which one really represents you. And he selected the second slide. Let's go to the next slide. And he explained why. He copied the fonts, he told me the sizes, and then he said he preferred the first slide because I work hard to reach my goals, and I want to reach goals that I think are difficult for me to achieve. So this was his explanation. And I thought it was beautiful. It was perfect. He is a hard worker. And the essay that he ended up writing displayed that, displayed his perseverance and overcoming obstacles.
Mhm.
Next slide, please. And here we are.
That's
Monday.
excellent. Thank you so much, Lisa. I can't wait to start asking you questions. But before we transition to the Q&A, I'm going to invite Larissa to talk to us a little bit about how she's been thinking about asynchronous or adapting our museum-based teaching strategies to asynchronous teaching resources.
Thank you, Lisa and Lisa. Yeah, I just wanted to mention a couple of quick things, a lot of which already mirrors what Lisa mentioned in her presentation. But how are we, but I think it's particularly relevant to people who have taken these courses on Coursera, the K-12 teacher courses, because it's what we've been considering is how can we take this conversational inquiry-based approach and adapt it? And I think one of the most important things is, as Lisa mentioned, is to consider the ways that people will be using resources. So I'm going to be particularly talking about this Mondays with MoMA, which is a weekly lesson that we put together. And we send it to teachers on a Friday so that they can look it over the weekend and present it to students on whatever platform they're using. It could be any one of those that Lisa mentioned, or there's a couple of other ones that I can think of. And then teachers share it out. And so this could be used in the classroom with the teacher facilitating, or in a remote classroom with the teacher facilitating. A lot of our teachers give these to parents as enrichment activities that parents can do with students at home to bring art into the classrooms. And then also, a lot of teachers will assign this to students to do independently, especially older students, and then come back and discuss. So thinking about all those different ways is how can we do that? A couple of things we wanted to maintain is we wanted to maintain the inquiry-based approach that we used. We wanted to prioritize looking over providing information. We wanted to engage students in this. Encourage conversation, which again is a funny thing to think about if you're thinking of a lesson plan, but we wanted the lesson plan to be built around conversation and also built around an artwork. And the structure of the lesson that we came up with was looking closely. Step one, look closely, and that included a couple of key questions, usually 3 to 4, something manageable, bite-sized that doesn't require a lot of work. That's not a lot of prep work. It's somebody can just pick it up and do it. The second one is learn more. We provide a little bit of background information about the artist, the artwork, and then an activity, which could be an art making activity, or it could be a writing activity, or sometimes even it's a movement activity. And we adapted this format also for another set of lessons called Artful Activities for Early Learners, which is especially geared for ages 4 and up. So we wanted to, so I think the most important thing, and this is also something that Lisa mentioned, is consistency, is we wanted teachers to know what to expect. We wanted them to know that this is something that they don't have to go and keep searching at it. Every Friday, they will get it, they will have it. It's a reminder for them that this is something that they have. So, and the consistency of the structure as well is, especially as a lot of students are doing this, if students are doing this independently, and parents who might not be as well versed as teachers in facilitating conversations about artworks, we wanted to provide them a structure. So I think the first thing I'm gonna say, the first takeaway is object selection is especially important in creating these lessons. It's important to have high-res images. For sculpture, as this lesson that you can see on your screen was, it's a sculpture image. Can you find a good image of it? It could be the most beautiful sculpture in person when you can walk around it, but if there's not a good image, it's not worth using it as in an online lesson. Because sometimes a photograph can't capture the most amazing sculpture. And then this is going to relate especially to what you learned in the courses, some of you, was that the theme has to be self-evident. Some artworks work really great in the galleries when you have opportunities to build up to them. So in a course of a gallery, if we have 3 works of art, we can save the most complicated one for the 3rd artwork once we've built a rapport with the students. But sometimes if we don't have a chance to do that, we just really need the artwork to speak for itself. So that's object selection. And establishing a theme is also very important, both for it to have continuity as a lesson and to just, make sure that it's a cohesive thing. We've discovered that some people use the lesson to just look at the questions, and some people just go directly to the activity, and some people do the whole lesson as is, but it has to work together and independently. But the theme does give that continuity, because you don't want to have the questions be about the artist process and then the activity be completely not about that. That has to kind of all tie together and feed into each other. This is probably the most kind of what we've been talking about amongst our team. The structure that we use is one of us drafts the lesson, and then we all review it to make sure that that it's coherent. And the thing I think we talk the most about are our questions. And I think this goes back to what Lisa said about being explicit. And it's so much easier in a conversation or when you're face to face with somebody to ask a question, and then you can have a chance to clarify it in the course of a conversation. You can add to the question, you can build on it. But here it's all on paper, so you have to formulate a very clear question, and that becomes extra important. And it's a good exercise to write a question down, because that becomes extra crucial when you think about yourself in the role of the person who's using it. Information, really paring it down so it's not a whole lot of information. In some lessons, it's about the autobiography of the artist, because that is important to understanding what the work is. In this lesson that we're looking at, we could have gone down the road of how this work was created and how it was installed at MoMA, because that's a very interesting story. But we decided to focus on the story, the myth that it's based off of, because that was what we really wanted them to get to. And then activities, same thing, just really being specific and adhering to the theme. The activity, always we were thinking of how to connect it to the theme, base it either on the big idea or on the artist process directly. And the other very important consideration is we always try to make it an activity that students could do with materials they had on hand at home, because we understand that not everybody has art making materials easily available. I just realized I have a lot of art making materials and I don't have construction paper, which is a very basic one. So I think that's another important consideration. So I think that's all I'm going to say for now. I'm going to pass it on to Francis, and he's going to expand on how we are also working on kind of how we are using these same lessons to adapt it to these videos, these short video lessons that we've been creating.
All right, thank you, Larissa. I think we can go to the next slide. All right, so I'm going to talk about the videos that we have been producing. Right now, there are 3 videos that we have on hand. And just, to avoid being redundant, a lot of the considerations when looking into this, Larissa already explained. For example, thinking about adapting our inquiry-based and discussion-based learning that happens in the galleries. But how can we do that when we don't have students on hand? So it's hard to get group learning. So when we started making these videos, we had the same considerations that we had for the Mondays with MoMA. How can we select works of art? Think about providing information that's relevant to the questions that we're asking. So more than anything, we wanted to see if we can create lessons through these videos that can expound on themes that we're thinking about. So for example, since Lisa had mentioned using Carrie James Marshall's Untitled, The Policeman, which is shown here on the left that she had talked about, you know, when I was producing that video, I was thinking, should I talk about Marshall's body of work? Should I talk about the themes that he usually does? Or should I talk about something that's visually evident? So I went to the route of the artist process. And in teaching here at MoMA, we have a theme called Materials in Process that you also see in Coursera in some of our courses, Materials in Process. But I wanted to see if I can ask these questions, and the questions, just like Lisa had mentioned, they're very straightforward, but they're also scaffolded. So it goes from observation to questions that could welcome inferences. But all the responses are based on what you see, especially in video. We have to be very clear. We can't ask questions that may be a little too off topic. So we stayed with, I stayed with the process of, or stayed with the idea of the artist process and representation of the figure. But one benefit that we have for having these videos, as opposed to Mondays with MoMA, where there's just one image, is we can add supplementary information or supplementary images. This one specifically, we happen to have we happen to include 4 preparatory drawings for this piece. So it made sense to think about the artist process of creating preparatory drawings before making a final work. But also more than anything else, we also want to stay true and honest to the artist's mission statement, artist statement. So for this one specifically, you know, Carrie James Marshall was responding to what was happening around them, especially with issues of police violence. And which is interesting, just like we had mentioned, that we hope these videos can be adapted into the teacher's lessons, teacher's curriculum, and what's happening. And it was interesting to see that, Lisa, you were able to break it up into 2 different lessons. So, you know, just to show you that, yes, these videos, even though they're between 4 to 8 minutes long, they can be adapted and used in whichever way makes sense for teachers. The other videos that we have are artist process, also weaving, and also exploring design. So weaving is just like the materials and process theme that we have. Exploring design is more similar to the idea of changing everyday objects or working with everyday objects. So those are some of the videos that we have. And one thing that I want to reiterate is that the information that we give and the way we approach these lessons is we don't think of them as exhaustive information about the biography of the artist or exhaustive information about the body of work, but it's something that can be taught and, just like I said, adapted into your lessons. We're currently making 3 more that should be coming up pretty soon. And one's gonna be about incorporating writing and poetry. One's gonna be about responding to contemporary movement, and another one about narratives that are made through photography and appropriation. And I think on that note, it would actually be a good, oh, sorry.
Can I add one thing to what we've been talking about is the opportunity of these, and I'm sorry, Francis, if you mentioned it and I missed it, but I love that it gives us the creating these videos also gives us the opportunity to show works that aren't necessarily on view, and show multiple works that aren't on view, because even though Carrie James Marshall's Untitled work is on view, I have never seen the preparatory drawings, and that allows us to incorporate MoMA's broader collection into our teaching.
Oh yeah, definitely. And in design, you know, Lisa was able to use other objects in design and kind of see, you know, here at MoMA, we also think about different ways that themes can help you teach across different collections, across different departments. But yes, it's a great benefit to show what may not be on view most of the time.
That's great. So let's have all the panelists visible now. Thank you all so much. I'm really excited to share these questions now and get everybody's input. So I'm just going to go ahead and dive right in here. And so the first question that I'm going to ask, and I'm going to start with you, Lisa. This is a question from Andrea, who I see is joining us today. I saw her enter from the Czech Republic, and she is specifically asking about younger learners And she says, I teach grades 1 to 2 students in Prague, Czech Republic, and most of the class is at a beginner level in English. How can I ask open-ended questions or create an inquiry-based online lesson and reach out, pardon me, to the students who can't understand me? Obviously you're teaching high school, but I know you and I had a conversation about Andrea's question, which she emailed in, and I'd love to get your feedback on this.
Okay, so Andrea, I've been thinking a lot about that question, about your multiple questions. And I think that the goal here is for you to decide what it is you want the students to produce, and what it is, what kind of standard are you looking to reach? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And then have a consistent way of accomplishing that. So start small, because I do think they understand. My experience has been they understand more than you think when they're learning a second language or a third language, especially when they're little. They just may not be able to verbalize that. So support them with a consistent kind of plan, kind of like the mood meter. Do the mood meter every day and add to that, and add another level and another question, scaffold the question, and then have them respond in a different fashion. Have them jump up and down, have them show an object in their house, give them various ways to express understanding. And once you do that, you'll be able to ask higher level questions. So I think the issue is not that they don't understand, it's that you need to scaffold their learning so that they will be able to express themselves in various ways. And art is a fabulous way to do that, because everybody's going to see something different in that piece of art. Maybe someone will see the butterfly, maybe somebody will see the dog, maybe someone will see the door. And then you're constantly building language, and then you can connect that to whatever subject. Because from what I understand, you're co-teaching with all the subjects. So you can take a piece of art in the science world, you can take a piece of art in the social studies world, you can incorporate it into whatever book you're reading, and raise the level through the resources that you're using. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and if you have follow-up questions, Andrea, feel free to comment in the chat. But that's really helpful to hear the way you describe that, Lisa. And as you know, you've been a partner school with MoMA for a long time. And Francis and Larissa and I, we teach so many English language learners. There's so many teachers who come to MoMA and have the students engage with the art as a way to work on their language skills. So it's just great to hear from your perspective in the classroom and to sort of see those overlaps. And I want to just follow up with another question for you, and maybe Francis and Larissa might want to address this possibly, but so Thera, hopefully I'm saying your name correctly. Her question is, their question is, so my question is, how can you plan remote learning and teaching activities and also monitor those activities when the resources are scarce and when the children do not have access to computers or the internet? And we have addressed this question a little bit in the previous session, but I'm curious, Lisa, if this is something that you're dealing with regularly and how you and or the school or other colleagues are addressing this.
Well, we've actually been fortunate in that our students all have computers, and the DOE has handed out iPads with internet for those students. So students who don't have resources, who don't have internet, it's a very difficult situation. I do know of teachers preparing packets and sending the packets home and asking them to be sent back, but that also costs money. I don't know if the school has that. So the question is, I think you really have to push towards making sure that students have access to technology. If anything, that's the equalizer in this environment. If we can get all of our students to have technology, because they did not have in the past. But you're in a very difficult situation. I would recommend sending packets home, somehow getting those packets back. It's a tough one. It really is a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we've been talking about at MoMA is getting resources out, and we actually have some plans in place to help get art making resources, and maybe even, going back to just printing things that we can then hopefully mail out to schools as well. And I think that's a topic that we need to keep talking about. And I even was talking to a former colleague of ours in school and teacher programs, and she was talking about ways in Costa Rica of using the phone and possibly incorporating that into teaching. And I see that there was a comment to that question. So Blandin, I hope I'm saying that name correctly. And it says, I created an at-home workshop based on the land art philosophy for learners to create an ephemeral artwork from objects they have access to. Everyday things, clothes, books, etc. work really well. And also, again, to Larissa's point when we were talking about making activities for Mondays with MoMA, and then also for the video lessons that we've been creating, is really focusing on materials that we know people might have right around them. And so next I have a question, and Lisa, you can start answering this one, and also Francis and Larissa, you let me know if you'd like to comment on this as well. But this comes from Alberto, who says, how do you think these remote sessions can affect the censorship of different discourses and currents that are more opposed to the classic academic model of the cultural sector and other educational sectors? So Alberto, if you're in the chat and you want to elaborate, feel free. But what I think you're saying is the dialogue somehow different in this remote learning landscape? Are we able, I'm reading this, and again, please tell me if I'm off here. Are there ways that we can approach content differently that aren't the sort of, as you say, classic academic model? And Lisa, do you have any thoughts about that? And then also Francis and Larissa, I'd love you to comment on that as well.
I think you have to change it up completely. I've changed my method of teaching completely. I focus in on exactly what it is I want the students to learn. I try not to be, usually I'm all over the place. I can't be, you have to be very consistent. So for example, in the spring, I only focused on conflict, external conflict, internal conflict, everything we read, the entire book, we read Frankenstein, we focused on conflict and finding examples of conflict, because that's what they needed to walk away understanding. And we could have gone to all different levels, but you can't. So here you have to be very focused on what you want to accomplish. This year, I'm focusing on a wide array of literary elements, okay? Because I want to embed that knowledge in them. I want to make sure that, but this year we're focusing on characterization, and we're beating characterization to death. So you really have to decide what it is you want students to learn and how you're going to get there. And it has to be very, very focused. Does that answer the question? You can't accomplish what we accomplished in the past. You can't touch on all the various things. You have to say, this is what you need to know, and this is how we're going to get there. The next thing.
I would absolutely support that. I think that's what we've been coming up with. As the answer that we've been coming up with is just like really honing in on the goals of the program of what we're trying to do. But Lisa, maybe you can say something about this. I've been hearing a lot from teachers is that the classrooms have been flipped, that some students who are more successful in remote teaching, in remote classrooms than they were in person. And I think that this is just, I think it does flip the model completely. And I thought that was a really heartening thing to hear, because I think we all went into this with this sense of this is terrible, but there are really helpful ways that these classrooms work. I don't know, Lisa, have you found that to be the case in your classrooms?
Yes, there are some students who are doing very well in the remote environment. Some students get very distracted with their peers, or if they're home and they have a quiet place where they can work, they're doing better. The teachers are being engaged in more writing with them. So there's lots of Google Hangouts going on, lots of emails going on. So their writing is improving, because you have to read in this environment and you have to write. You can't get away with it. You can't get away with me explaining it to you and then you go talking to your friends and copying from Joe Schmo. You just can't. So I just think that, yes, there are some benefits. And I do think in an odd sort of way, it's equalizing the playing field. Because all students now, almost all in New York City, now have technology and now have internet, whereas they didn't in the past. All students are being forced to read and to write and to build themselves up. So there are some benefits from it as well.
I want to add some, Yeah, and I want to add something to the idea of content and voices. Just like Larissa had mentioned, we now have the opportunity to actually work with different artworks and present different artists who are maybe, not maybe, who are less hegemonically represented in different museums or different conversations. But now we're able to present their points of view and actually even present, maybe do a comparison between two different artworks and two different approaches. And in that way, we don't ask, and this is a part of our pedagogy, is we don't ask any leading questions. We would love responses to be as divergent as possible. So we'll just ask questions presenting ideas and thoughts and allow students to come up with their own opinions on that.
And I agree with everything that you've all said. And I just wanted to share a comment that Landon, and again, I hope I'm saying the name correctly, just made a comment that this was previously, that remote classes encourage us all to think about the roots of teaching, to question content, to question pedagogy, assessment. And it also can enhance interactions, which could appear contradictory. And I think I totally get that. I think that in addition to everything everyone said about some of the opportunities that remote teaching allows us, that there are some of these other sort of more positive or benefits that we wouldn't necessarily know unless we were in this situation and we're going through it. So it is really interesting to continue to see that evolve. And I'm going to pose a question to Larissa and Francis from Olivia. And the question is, do you think museum education activities will be the same before and after the pandemic? I know I have thoughts about this, and I'd love you guys to start sharing your thoughts about that.
That's a big question that goes to the heart of, I think, so many conversations we've been having. Yes and no. I think, do we still want to bring students back into the museum for experiences? Absolutely. I think what we're considering is what are the different ways that will be working. I think this online moment for us has been very special, as evidenced by the people who have joined us today. Is we're able to talk to people everywhere in the world by these resources, whereas before we were limited to, but we were working with our immediate community, and we want to continue doing that. But that's not a great moment where this has happened. I think we're changing the way I think we're going to have to look differently at the way we have conversations in the galleries. I think we want to consider, Francis mentioned this a little bit, and I think he probably might have something to add. I think we really want to, what we already are doing is consider students' voices, but also make sure that our teaching and the artworks that we choose is in line with who the students are, and responds to, and kind of it represents the students themselves, and that they see themselves in the museum in multiple ways. So I think there's some things that we want to keep from this moment, some things we want to bring back, as in like bring back school groups, and some things that will never be the same. I don't know, Francis, what do you think? That was a everything answer. So it was a yes, and yes answer to your question, that I think that we're thinking about all the possibilities.
Yeah, and my response is yes, and. so yes to all that. And what's really interesting is, we've gone back into going into the root of things, and I've seen this in the Q&A, the questions of really honing down the pedagogy, honing down the questions, just like Lisa Montalbano had said, make the questions as direct and simple as possible. And that's something we try to do, is we try to make sure we ask clear questions. But it's also, what's interesting, looking at the chat, Blondine also talked about the idea that we have to be adaptable. And part of the adaptation is using what's available, chats, or maybe using Google Forms. And I myself, English is my second language, and I'm usually more comfortable writing than I am speaking. But this also gives us a chance, sometimes when we're in the galleries and we're having group conversations, and we know some students feel a little shy and are not used to or don't like speaking in large groups. So we ask them to do writing activities. So now those writing activities are adapted into the chats or through different assignments or through writing exercises instead of just drawing exercises. So yes, and.
Well, it's interesting because Blending, you've now outed yourself as a museum educator. So some of those questions make sense now. And, Abu had made, put in a comment that I wanted to share, which he basically was saying, they were saying that, how can I connect with MoMA in Bangladesh? There's no specific museum of fine art. And to that point, I think all of us now see the opportunity, and I know I'll speak for myself personally, and it's been great to be able to work with Francis and Larissa on things like these video lessons, which are just a different form, a different format, a different way of me thinking about my own practice. And I think all of that content now, in addition to the other online content we were already producing, I think we all see it as completely relevant because we now know we can reach a larger amount of people. And, you'll see in the chat, Blendon, you made that comment, never has there been more of these resources. And so that's out of the situation. Suddenly, there is this incredible amount of resources that are available more widely. So I think that's great. I'm going to go back to an earlier question, and then I'm also going to ask Sharon. You can elaborate in the chat if you want to just elaborate more on your question. We'll get back to it, but I want to go to a question that someone asked, and I think it was Isabel, and I think, Lisa, this is going to be for you. And so Isabel, if we weren't sure we understood your question, but you can tell us in the chat if we have it. You asked about, it says, Lisa, in which special situations do you use the question about feeling on admissions? Is this something like making students think about commitment? So Lisa, maybe did you want to go back to how you had your students working on the admissions and the those words and the descriptions and all of that?
So I think you're referring back to the mood meter and how I ask questions. I ask students how they feel. Is that what that question is?
That's what I think. Yes.
Okay.
So let's assume that's.
So I use the mood meter every day that we meet, which is in this blended model. So it's 2 to 3 times a week. So the first thing they do is take attendance on Google Classroom on a question, and then they immediately go to the mood meter. I do not share their feelings with the class. I do read them as they're going through. I do use it as a transition time as students come on to the call, but I don't share their feelings. I do read them. I read all of them, and I listen. And there were a couple of situations where there were some students who were at risk. So we talked about it, and I referred that to guidance. But in general, I just use it as a way to touch base. Let's just touch base. Let me hear how you're doing. And then sometimes if I know the student well enough, I'm like, oh my God, you're not having a good day today. What's going on? And I know that might be a student that would want to share. Whereas a student that I know wouldn't share, maybe later in an email, I'll ask them how you're feeling, but I use it. One of my strengths is not consistency, but I've learned that I have to be consistent in this environment. So I have been very consistent in using the mood meter, and it has helped me to connect with the students, but it does get boring after a while. So I change it by adding new questions and new ideas that are not necessarily related to feelings. So they don't feel like they're just doing the same thing every day. So we talked about the elections. I don't know what we'll talk about tomorrow. We'll see what happens. So I use that to touch base. Does that answer your question? And again, consistency and respect for their feelings. Be careful with how you use that information.
Yeah, I was going to say, thank you for pointing that out, Lisa. And that's something that we've been doing and thinking a lot about here at the museum is social emotional learning, trauma-informed practice. So obviously we never want to put students in a situation that's going to be triggering or harmful in some way. But I think it's really interesting, especially now, I guess I wonder for you, do you feel like you because of what's happening and because you have this process built in this way, do you feel like the way you're connecting with your students is different now?
Absolutely, because many of my students don't talk, they don't participate in the chats and they don't participate on the calls. They do their work, but they're not actively participating. So this is one way that I know every day they're telling me something about themselves. And if they don't tell me enough, I do go back. And I say, you know what, you just can't say you're happy, you're yellow today because you're happy. Why are you happy? So I do go back. There are some students who it took a while for them to be comfortable filling it out. I gave them that flexibility. But yes, I don't think I would have any idea how they're feeling unless I did this. True. It'd be very hard to know how they're feeling.
And
It's
I
a
think
great way
that's
to
so
start.
important.
And it doesn't take a long time either. It really doesn't. I thought it would take long. It really doesn't.
And that's really hitting home for me. And also how you've been talking about, you really want your students to have fun, right? Because you want them to be learning, but we really need to monitor the social emotional health of ourselves, and the students. So that's really helpful to hear you just elaborate on that. Sharon's asking a question about, do teacher educators often use your programs? And I'm assuming they mean MoMA, our MoMA programs or MoMA resources. So Sharon, you can let us know in the chat if I have that off, but she's basically asking, do teachers use it in their everyday lesson plans or in special art related projects? I'm thinking,
Well, we hope so.
Yeah. So Francis and Larissa, do you want to share what we found out some good information, we think, but is there anything more you want to elaborate on, either one of you, about sort of like, because we've been getting a lot of feedback, teachers, you can share how we have that feedback loop kind of sort of built in.
Yeah, I think, well, we certainly hope that teachers and educators find our resources useful. We do always try to send out occasional surveys to figure out how teachers are using them and to figure out how they might be the most useful so that we can adapt as we go. I think the biggest thing is, like, do teachers use programs? Yes, and you know what I always say, but if they're using them exactly, if they're just reading off the sheet of paper, I don't know if that's, that's also valuable, but teachers always tell me interesting ways that they adapt our content. They'll say, like, I took this idea that you threw out, I didn't do it the way you said it, but I did it this other way. And I think that that's such an interesting thing. And I hope that that's how teachers use it, and hope that teachers use their knowledge and expertise of their students. We can't be in every classroom. We can't know your students the way you do. I can't be in Lisa's, and I shouldn't be in Lisa's mood meter reading. So I don't have that basic information, but teachers, that's what teachers do the best, is take content and and they can build it off. They can do a 15-minute lesson, or they can build it into a whole unit of study. So that's my takeaway. And I hope that we can provide the resources to help them do that.
And I'd like to add that from some of the emails that we've gotten from people asking to be on the mailing list, is that teachers also know their students and know the students' families most of the time. So some of these resources, even if the teachers don't use it in the classroom, I know that they pass it off to parents, because we've had parents request to be put on the mailing list as well.
That's great. Thank you so much. I want to be just aware of everyone's time because it's 2:30 now. So I want to say thank you to my colleagues, Francis and Larissa. Thank you so much, Lisa, for being here with us. Thank you all for spending this hour with us and sharing these very interesting and thoughtful questions. We're going to be sending you a short survey that will help inform office hours in the future and other virtual offerings. So we will invite you to please share your feedback. We'd love to keep this conversation going. So there is a discussion forum thread, as you saw. So please continue to share thoughts there, because Francis and Larissa and I are always in the checking in on the forums. We can also field questions to Lisa. And once again, we just want to all say thank you so much. And I invite my colleagues to also share their thanks, and we hope we see you at the next session.